The Insult in the Market Square. The market square was loud and full of color. Strange alien creatures moved between stalls selling glowing fruits, robotic pets, and shiny tools. The air smelled like burnt metal, and sweet spice humans were rare here. And when they were seen, they were often ignored or mocked. Jake was one of those humans. He worked as a delivery runner carrying small packages across the alien city. For a few credits, his clothes were dusty, his shoes worn out, and his face tired. But he kept walking through the busy crowd, carefully holding a small parcel wrapped in plasma-resistant cloth. Suddenly, a hover car landed nearby with flashing gold lights, and two tall alien guards stepped out. They were dressed in white armor with glowing lines down their arms. Then she appeared walking down like she owned the stars herself. Tall, with silver-skin hair, like flowing violet flame, and a golden bag in her hand. The alien heiress daughter of one of the richest houses on the planet. Crowd quickly made space. Everyone bowed their heads or stepped back. But Jake was focused on finding the address on his package. He didn't even see her coming, not until she walked right into him. The bump was small, but the moment froze in the square. The golden bag slipped from her fingers and landed on the dirty ground. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Her eyes widened in horror and then anger. She looked down at Jake like he was nothing like a bug under her heel. Her voice was sharp, cold, and full of pride. "This bag is worth more than you." She yelled loud enough that everyone heard the words echoed around the market, and people began to laugh. Aliens pointed fingers, some shaking their heads while others just smiled in cruel amusement. Jake stood still. He didn't shout back. He didn't apologize. He just looked at her for a second, then bent down to pick up the golden bag. He held it out carefully, avoiding her eyes. She didn't take it right away. She stared at him like he had insulted. Her soul then snatched the bag from his hands. Her nose wrinkled in disgust. "Do not touch anything that doesn't belong to your kind," she snapped before turning away as her guards followed her like shadows. Jake let out a breath and started to walk. Again, but his hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something else. Something quiet and deep inside him. He had been insulted before, he had been looked down on before. But something about this moment burned worse than the rest. He didn't get far, maybe 10 steps when it happened. A sound like a whisper. Then a flash from a nearby rooftop. A plasma shot flew through the air straight toward the heiress. Her back was turned. She didn't even see it coming. The guards were too slow, too distracted by the crowd. But Jake saw it. Without thinking, without hesitation, he dropped the package and ran. His legs moved before his brain could catch up. He jumped. The crowd screamed. The plasma bolt struck Jake's shoulder just as he tackled the heiress to the ground. The heat tore through his jacket and burned his skin. But he didn't stop rolling with her across the stone floor. The golden bag flew from her hand again and landed in a puddle. The guards surrounded them, weapons drawn, but it was too late. The sniper had vanished. The rooftop was already empty. The heiress pushed Jake off, her stunned eyes-wide mouth slightly open. She looked at the wound on his shoulder. The smoke rising from his clothes and the blood beginning to soak through. You saved me," she said, her voice softer now, confused. Jake tried to sit up but winced. The pain was sharp and hot like fire eating his skin. He looked at her again. Sweat on his forehead. "No one deserves to be shot," he said simply, his voice low. Then everything went black as he passed out in her arms. The market square was silent now. No one laughed. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause. The girl who moments ago had screamed her bag was more valuable than him now held the bleeding human who saved her life. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to say. She looked down at him again. This dirty, broken human with burnt clothes and kind eyes, and something strange twisted inside her chest. Something she had never felt before. And it scared her more than the sniper ever could. He took the shot meant for her. The crowd stayed frozen as the human lay in the heiress's arms, his body limp, his breathing shallow, the plasma burn on his shoulder still smoking the smell of scorched cloth and skin filled the air. The guards finally moved, shouting into their comms, calling for medical drones and security lockdowns. But the girl didn't speak. She was still staring at him. This human, who just moments ago was nothing in her eyes, now lay bleeding because he saved her, because he ran into danger, while everyone else froze. A drone floated down from the sky and scanned his body. Green lights flashed quickly. Then a voice spoke from the drone system, reporting plasma wound to the upper torso. Human male unconscious but alive. Immediate surgery required transferring to medical unit. The guards tried to lift him, but the heiress stopped them. Her voice quiet, but firm. I'll go with him. The guards looked confused, unsure of what to do. Her father's orders had been clear. She wasn't supposed to be alone. Not after recent threats, but she didn't wait for permission. She followed the drone as it carried Jake toward the royal transport, ignoring the looks from the crowd, ignoring even the golden bag now soaked in rainwater and forgotten on the dirty ground. Inside the medical pod, the room was white and cold. Machines hummed around Jake as medics worked quickly, sealing his wound with liquid mesh, pumping him with oxygen and stabilizers. His heartbeat was slow but steady. The heiress stood in the corner, arms crossed, her face unreadable. But her eyes never left him. Who does that? She whispered to herself. Save someone. They don't even know. Someone who insulted them. Someone who meant nothing. She thought of her own people, how they bowed and smiled but only cared for status. How even her friends would never jump into danger for her. Not without orders. Not like this. An hour passed, the doctors said he would live. But he needed rest. His body was weak. His shoulder might never fully heal. When he finally opened his eyes, he blinked slowly, trying to focus, the room spinning slightly. The first thing he saw was her sitting near his bed. Her violet hair pulled back, her royal jewelry missing. She looked smaller without the gold. You're alive, she said quietly. Jake tried to smile but winced. Instead, he looked down at his wrapped arm, then back at her. Didn't think I'd get shot just for walking through a market, he joked weakly. She didn't laugh. She just looked at him and then asked, why did you do it? He blinked again, unsure if he heard her. Right? Why did you save me? She asked again, her voice soft and serious. He took a breath, then spoke slowly. Because you didn't see it coming, because I did, and because I could. She stared at him for a long moment, then stood up and walked to the wall, her back to him. You could have died. He nodded. Yeah. She turned back to him, her eyes darker than before. Not angry, just confused, maybe even hurt. I said terrible things to you. I treated you like trash, and you still jumped in front of that. Shot. Jake shrugged with his good shoulder. Doesn't matter what you said. No one deserves that. Not even you. The words hit harder than anything else. She expected anger or pride or sarcasm, but he gave her honesty and kindness. Instead, suddenly a knock on the door. The head guard entered and saluted her, speaking quickly. My lady, we have news. The attack was planned by your cousin. He left the city before we could catch him, but we believe he will try again. You are no longer safe here. She didn't blink. She just nodded slowly, then asked, where's the safest place right now? The guard hesitated. Honestly, with him, the enemy won't expect you to hide among commoners, especially not with a human. Jake raised an eyebrow. Wait, what? You saved her life. The guard said, you've earned her trust, and we can use that to protect her until we secure the palace again. We ask you to stay with her. Jake looked at the heiress, confused. You want me to be your bodyguard? She shook her head. No. I want you to just be there. That's all. I don't know why, but I feel safer with you than anyone else right now. He blinked again, unsure what to say. But something inside told him to nod, and he did. So they made a plan. He would take her to the edge of the city where the royal guard couldn't follow, where no one would expect an heiress to hide with a human in a world full of pride and power. She looked at him once more as he stood up slowly, his arms stiff and painful, but his legs steady. "Let's go," she said, her voice quiet but full of something new. Maybe respect, maybe trust, maybe the start of something bigger. And as they walked out of the medical bay, together, no one noticed that the golden bag was still lying in the street, forgotten and worthless. But the human wasn't. Not anymore. Forced to hide together. The transport moved fast across the silent night sky. The windows dimmed, the city lights below glowing like veins in a metal beast. The heiress sat beside Jake in silence, her royal clothes replaced with a plain cloak, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Jake watched her from the corner of his eye, her face no longer proud, no longer angry, just tired and distant. He didn't know what to say, and she didn't seem ready to speak. When the ship landed, it wasn't at a palace or a mansion. It was in the lower slums, a place where the rich never stepped, where machines sparked in the streets, and hungry eyes watched from dark corners. "This is where we're hiding?" Jake asked, looking around at the cracked walls and rusted walkways. The guard nodded before flying away, leaving the two alone in the dim alley. A door opened to a small room lit by one weak light. A bed, a broken table, and a small stove that clicked but didn't work. Jake entered first, brushing off the dust. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, uncertain for the first time. "Come in," he said. "It's not a palace, but it'll keep you alive." She stepped in slowly, her eyes scanning every corner of the room as if it might bite her. She sat on the bed carefully as if it might collapse. Jake found a water filter and poured her a cup. She took it without a word and stared at the wall. "I've never been in a place like this." She said softly, "Yeah." "I figured," Jake replied, pulling a small blanket from a cabinet and tossing it on the bed. "Do you live like this?" "Sometimes when I have credits, I rent a pod. When I don't, I sleep on delivery ships." She looked at him again, her eyes no longer judging, just curious. "You saved me, and now I'm in your world." He chuckled a little. "Funny how that works." The next morning, she woke to the sound of boots outside. Jake peeked through the window, then motioned her to hide. They crouched behind the wall, holding their breath as shadowy figures moved past the door. "They're looking for you." He whispered, his hand lightly touching hers to keep her calm. She didn't pull away. After the danger passed, they went out only when it was safe. Jake took her through the back alleys where no cameras worked, where old humans and aliens lived side by side, sharing food and stories in low voices. Children ran barefoot through puddles, laughing. Old machines burned in corners for warmth, and people nodded at Jake when they saw him. Some even gave him food or smiled at him. He helped a blind alien woman cross a broken street, gave a fruit to a coughing child, and fixed a boy's broken wheel cart with wires from a dead drone. The heiress followed quietly, watching everything, her eyes wide, her heart confused. "These people have nothing," she said, "and they still give." Jake looked at her. "Yeah, they know how it feels to be forgotten." She didn't answer, just stared at an old man feeding stray pets from his own plate. By the third day, her cloak was dirty, her hands sore from helping Jake carry supplies, her feet blistered, but she didn't complain. At night, they sat together in silence, then slowly began to talk. He told her about Earth, how he ended up on this planet, how he lost everything and started over with only his backpack and some luck. She told him about her father, strict and distant, her world full of fake smiles and gold cages, how she always wanted to escape but never had the courage. Funny, she said, I had to be hunted to feel free. He smiled a little. And I had to be insulted to meet you. She laughed quietly for the first time. It wasn't cold or sharp. It was warm and real. In that small room, she started doing things she had never done before. Cooking simple meals, folding clothes, even learning how to fix a loose wire. She asked questions about tools, about human jokes, about life without guards. Jake watched her change each day, a little less royal, a little more real. But danger was still near. Bounty posters with her face started to appear in the black markets, and whispers about the reward reached even the lowest levels. One evening, Jake returned with bread and found her holding his old jacket, patching it with a needle. Her fingers clumsy but careful. You didn't have to do that, he said. She looked up and smiled slightly. You took a shot for me. It's the least I can do. He stood there for a moment, feeling something strange in his chest. Something warm. Something he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Yes. But more than that. Trust. She looked at him again, this time. Not as a servant or protector, but as someone who mattered. And for the first time since the day in the market square, she said his name. Thank you, Jake. And the way she said it made him feel like maybe he wasn't just a human in a forgotten corner of the galaxy anymore. Maybe he was something more. The street show. Her the truth. Rain fell from the metal sky, dripping down pipes and broken rooftops. The streets below glistened with oily puddles, reflecting neon signs that flickered in the dark, narrow alleys. The human and the heiress walked side by side, both wrapped in old cloaks, hiding from eyes that could sell her for credits. Jake walked with steady steps, his eyes sharp, always watching, always alert, his injured shoulder still healing under the bandages. But he didn't complain. She followed close, holding the edge of her hood as wind pulled at her silver hair. Her boots soaked from dirty water. They stopped near a soup stall, steam rising from a pot where a kind old alien with cracked horns poured warm broth into rusty bowls. Jake nodded at him and handed over 2 small coins. The old one smiled and gave them each a bowl. The heiress looked down at the strange gray liquid, her nose wrinkled at the smell. But then she saw Jake drinking it without hesitation, so she copied him. The taste was strange, bitter, then sweet. But it warmed her from the inside. Children ran past them laughing, even in the rain, barefoot, and wild ones stopped and looked at her with wide, glowing eyes, then handed her a tiny flower made of metal wire before running off again. She stood frozen, the twisted wires still in her hand. She watched as Jake helped the old vendor fix a broken fuel pipe using scraps from his pocket. The vendor smiled and gave Jake a small charm in return, then waved at them with warmth in his eyes. You know them all? She asked quietly. Jake shrugged. I do what I can. They've helped me when I had nothing, but they have nothing themselves, she said, softly. That's why they help. He answered, sometimes only those who've lost everything know how to care. The heiress didn't speak. She just stared at the people around her. Aliens of many kinds, faces marked by hardship, yet filled with quiet kindness. They shared what little they had. No titles, no pride, only survival and small acts of care. Later they sat on an old rooftop sharing bread under a broken awning. Below them music played from an open window. A slow alien tune that hummed with sadness and hope. The heiress leaned back, watching the gray clouds roll across the sky. I was taught to avoid people like this, she said. I was told they were dangerous, dirty, unworthy. Jake looked at her. You believed that? She didn't answer for a moment, then shook her head. I wanted to believe I was better than them because I had gold and dresses and guards. And now I don't know what to believe. Jake tore a piece of bread and handed it to her. You're seeing what matters. She took it and stared at the city lights flickering like stars trapped under glass. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat near the window watching a young alien mother across the alley rocking her child. singing a soft lullaby through cracked lips. Her eyes tired but full of love. The heiress felt something twist inside, something she couldn't name. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't shame. It was both and more. She stood and walked to Jake, who was resting on the floor, wrapped in an old blanket. He opened one eye when he saw her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She nodded and sat beside him. "Jake, do you think people can change?" He looked at her carefully. "Yeah, but only if they want to. I want to." She said, "I don't want to go back to who I was, then don't." He replied gently, looked at him, her eyes wet. Not from fear, not from pain, but from truth. "You don't know what it's like being told you're above everyone, then learning you were never worth more than a bag." He smiled a little. "You weren't the bag, you were just carrying it." She laughed softly, then looked down, her hand brushing against his. "You're not like the others," she said. "You never asked for anything. Not even after saving me." Jake shrugged again. "Maybe I'm tired of people who only take." She leaned her head on his shoulder, careful of the bandage, her voice almost a whisper. "You're the first real thing I've ever known." And in that moment, she knew something had changed forever, not just in how she saw the world, but in how she saw him. Not a human, not a servant, not even a hero, but someone who made her feel seen. Enemies close in. The nights were growing colder, the stars above the city hidden behind thick smoke and clouds. The lights below flickered dimly, like they too were tired of shining in a place where hope was rare. Jake and the heiress stayed low, moving from one shelter to another, never sleeping in the same place twice. They didn't speak much now, but their silence was not empty. It was warm, like two fires burning quietly side by side. She no longer wore her royal cloak, only a simple jacket, patched at the elbows, her silver hair tied back with a piece of string Jake had given her. But peace never lasts long in a city filled with secrets. One morning, Jake opened the door to a delivery box outside. Nothing inside but a small blinking dot and a note written in rough alien script. "Found you." He shut the door fast and grabbed her hand. "We need to leave now." She didn't ask why, she just followed. They ran through old train tunnels and service pipes crawling under grates, stepping through oily water and rusted cables, her breath heavy but steady, her fingers tight around his. They reached an abandoned station deep underground, walls cracked with age-old posters flapping in the wind from broken vents. Here, Jake stopped to rest, leaning against the wall, his shoulder still aching from the burn. She looked around and asked, "How long until they find us again?" He answered, "Not long." She sat beside him, then whispered, "I don't want to run anymore." Jake nodded. "Neither do I." A noise echoed through the tunnel, metal steps, boots careful and slow-moving, like a hunter in the dark. They turned off their lights and held their breath. Shadows moved past broken lights above them. Then came a voice, low, cold, and familiar. "Come out, princess. I know you're near." It was her cousin, the one who ordered her death. His voice echoed again. "You should have died in that square, would have saved me the trouble." Jake reached for the small weapon hidden in his boot. It wasn't much, just a stun pulse, barely enough to slow someone down, but it was all he had. She looked at him, eyes wide, then shook her head. "If they take you, they'll kill you. Better me than you." He said. "No," she replied. "Not this time." The footsteps came closer, then stopped. A tall shadow appeared at the far end of the tunnel, wearing black armor with glowing red eyes behind his mask. Two more followed, both armed, both ready to fire. Jake stood slowly, placing himself between them and her, even as she tried to pull him back. The cousin laughed softly. "The human wants to die for you again. How noble, how pathetic." Jake didn't flinch. "You talk too much." A flash of light. The first shot fired. Jake rolled to the side, grabbed a loose pipe from the ground and threw it. Hitting one of the guards in the chest, he dropped his weapon as sparks flew. The heiress picked up the weapon without hesitation, her hands shaking but her aim steady. She fired once, striking the second guard in the leg. He screamed and fell. Only the cousin remained, his eyes now locked. "On her, you dare point that at me!" He growled, "Your own blood." She stared at him, then spoke clearly. "I'm not yours to command anymore." He charged forward, too fast, too strong. Jake jumped in the way, taking the full hit and slamming into the wall the stun. Pulse flew from his grip. The heiress screamed and fired again. The shot hit her cousin's side. He staggered, then rushed at her, grabbing her wrist and twisting hard. The weapon fell. Jake got up slowly, blood at the corner of his mouth, his body screaming, in pain. But he didn't stop. He grabbed a metal rod and struck her cousin across the back, sending him crashing to the ground. The silence that followed was heavy. The cousin groaned, but didn't rise. Jake stood over him, breathing hard, and then looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded, eyes wide, still shaking. They tied up the cousin and left him there, called the guard through a secret channel, gave them the location, and disappeared before help arrived. That night, they hid in a rooftop shelter under a leaking ceiling, cold wind blowing through the cracks. She wrapped a blanket around Jake and held his hand. "You could have died again," she said. "Yeah, but I didn't." She looked at him carefully, then spoke the words that had been building inside her for days. "Never trusted anyone like I trust you." He met her gaze and saw no pride, no arrogance, only truth. "You've changed." He whispered. "So have you," she replied, and in the cold, broken city above the stars, neither of them could see. But somehow, they both felt they were getting closer to something real. She offers him everything. The sun finally rose over the edge of the city, casting light on the metal towers and dirty streets. The long night was over, but the danger still lingered. Jake sat on a crate, in the shadows, wrapping new bandages on his arm, while the heiress stood near the broken window, staring out at the busy traffic below. "It's done," she said softly. The message reached the palace. "My cousin is in chains now, and the council knows the truth." Jake looked up, his face calm and quiet. "So you're going back?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands tightened around the edge of the window, her voice low. "They want me to return, take my place again. Pretend nothing happened." Jake nodded. "That's what royals do, right?" She turned to face him, but her eyes weren't cold anymore. They were filled with something else, something uncertain, something heavy. "You saved me 3 times. She said you hid me. You fed me. You bled for me. And I'd do it again," he said simply. She stepped closer now, her voice shaking a little. "I treated you like garbage when we met. I was cruel. I looked at you like you were nothing." Jake looked at her and smiled a little. "Yeah, you did. And still you stayed," she whispered. "Still, you cared. Because I saw who you were behind the gold and pride." He replied, "Not a queen, not a jewel, just a girl trying to figure out who she is." She sat beside him, and for a long moment they just listened to the city sounds, the engines, the voices, the wind. Then she pulled something from her cloak, a small silver card glowing with power. "This is a royal bond card." She said it gives access to anything on the system. Credit ships, protection, even a new identity if you want. Jake blinked. "You're giving me that I'm offering it," she said slowly. "You can take it and live any life you want, or you can come with me back to the palace by my side." He laughed a little, shaking his head. "I'm a delivery guy, remember. I don't belong in your world." She leaned forward, her voice soft but clear. "That world is mine to shape. Now I can bring anyone into it. I choose you." He looked at the card, then looked at her. "And if I say no?" She smiled a little, then said, "Then I leave it here and go with you wherever that leads. Stared at her, searching for the trick, the trap, the pride. But there was none, just honesty. Why me, he asked. Because you never asked for anything. Not when you saved me. Not when I was broken. You never wanted my power. Only my safety. He looked down, then whispered, I don't want your gold. She nodded. I know. I don't want to be a prince or a hero or whatever title comes next. She reached for his hand, then said, I'm not offering titles. I'm offering something real. He looked at her fingers wrapped around his calloused hand and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He stood and walked to the window. The light hit his face, and for a moment he looked far away, lost in thought. Then he turned to her and said, Kate. Her eyes lit up. But she didn't cheer. She just smiled like someone who had been holding her breath for too long. So what now? He asked. Now. We change everything. She replied. They left the shelter one last time, walked through the market where it all began. The same crowd. Different eyes. People watched them as they passed the former heiress, walking beside the human. Not as royalty. Not as a show, but as equals. She gave the royal signal at the square, and within seconds a hover transport arrived. Sleek and silent guards stepped out with surprised faces, unsure how to respond. Jake took one step back, but she held his hand firm. He comes with me, she said. The guards bowed and opened the doors inside the ship. She sat close to him. Not on a throne, not on a royal seat. Just beside him, like always. As the ship rose above the city, the wind pushed against the windows. But she didn't look down at the palace or the towers or the riches. She only looked at Jake, and he looked back at her. No longer just a human. No longer just a girl. Now, something new was starting, something better. He refuses her riches, but not her heart. The royal ship flew over golden towers, clean roads, and shining domes. Everything below was polished, perfect, and cold. Jake sat near the wide window, watching the city grow smaller behind them. He could feel the silence between them, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just filled with questions neither of them had answered yet. The heiress sat beside him, her fingers gently brushing against his. She wore a soft smile. Not the proud one she used to wear, but something honest, something warmer than all the sunlights of her kingdom. As the ship landed at the royal courtyard, guards lined up in perfect rows. Highborn ministers waited with stiff backs and practiced smiles. Cameras floated around, capturing every moment, every expression. She stood first, tall and calm, her hair braided in silver threads, her cloak royal again. But she turned to Jake before stepping out, her eyes asking for one thing. Stay close. Jake nodded and followed her down the steps, feeling 100 eyes on him. Some curious, some disgusted, some afraid, and some full of surprise. A human, walking beside the royal daughter without chains, without orders, with respect. The king stepped forward, old, strong, and dressed in gold. His eyes locked on his daughter, then moved to Jake. His face unreadable. Father, she said before anyone could speak, I bring the man who saved my life. The man who protected me when our own failed, the man I trust more than anyone. Here Jake bowed slightly, but didn't speak. He didn't need to. The king studied him, then finally said softly, I've heard of you and I owe you thanks. Jake only nodded. They were led into the royal hall. Tall pillars, glowing lights. Soft music playing somewhere above the table was already set with plates from across the galaxy, and gifts wrapped in golden paper lined the wall. These are yours, the king said, for what you've done. Jake looked at the gifts and then at the heiress. He shook his head. I don't need gold or titles or a ship with my name. I just need to know she's safe. The room went silent. Even the music stopped for a moment. The ministers blinked, confused. One of them whispered something like foolish or primitive, but Jake didn't care. The heiress smiled gently and walked to him and, "What? If I don't want to be safe without you?" He looked at her surprised. "You belong here," he said softly. "This is your world, not mine." She stepped closer, so close he could feel her breath against his skin. "I belonged there until you showed me something better." He laughed a little, not mocking, just soft and full of wonder. "I don't even have a home." Then she said quietly, "Make one with me." The words dropped like a stone into still water, ripples moving through the entire room. He stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Jake reached out and held her hand in front of everyone, not hiding, not pretending. She turned to the king and said, "This is my choice. Not as a daughter, not as a title, but as a woman." The king paused, then smiled just a little and said, "Then so be it." The hall slowly came alive again. The music returned softer this time. Ministers spoke in low voices, trying to understand what just happened. Jake stood beside her through it all, through the ceremonies, through the royal meetings, through the press waves and the long days that followed. But when it was over and the lights were low and the castle was quiet, he found her alone in the garden under a glowing tree, its petals falling like silver snow. He sat beside her on the stone bench, neither of them wearing crowns or badges or cloaks, just him and her. She looked at him, then leaned her head on his shoulder. "You changed everything." He smiled and said, "You let it happen." They sat there for a long time, not speaking, just breathing. The girl who once shouted that a bag was worth more than him was now holding his hand like he was the only thing in the galaxy that mattered. And the human who once slept under rusted roofs was now sitting under royal stars with someone who chose him not for what he had, but for who he was. Maybe they were from different worlds. Maybe they never should have met. But they did. And that was enough. The end.